The federal government and Nigerians grappling with the double of unpleasant ballooning subsidy spending, unabating petrol scarcity, and queues in the country. Petroleum products marketers under the aegis of the Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, MOMAN, have advised the government to end the subsidy regime by adopting a gradual removal approach. According to the chairman of MOMAN, Mr. Olumide Adeosun, he insists that the government's approved pump price of 165 naira is no longer realistic, adding that our petrol subsidy payment is no longer sustainable as it is killing marketers, businesses, hereby calling for the adoption of a phased removal approach, which will require adjusting upwards the price of petrol little by little, which will also ensure consumers are protected against the attendant shocks. In the last few months, Nigerians have been grappling with the challenges of getting petrol to fuel their cars, to power their generators, amongst others, and Abuja, Lagos, and other cities have been the most hit by the fuel crisis, which has led to also we see some closures in some filling stations. To give insights into this development, I'm being joined via Zoom by senior energy analyst at Steris Business, Noel Okoji. Noel, it's good to see you. How are you today?
It's good to see you too. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Let's get talking. 4 trillion naira is budgeted for subsidy this year. We don't know if that will be enough. The price of crude continues to, well, it's flip-flop, up and down. Before we go to phased removal of subsidy, what is your take? We are back to this again. I know we've talked about this before. How sustainable is this? Can we continue to do this?
Well, Tolope, obviously it's not sustainable anymore. Like you said, we've budgeted 4 trillion naira for subsidies for this year, but there's no guarantee that it will be enough. The IMF has said that we might spend up to 6 trillion naira for subsidies for just this year alone. And that is crazy, considering the things that Nigeria is up against, even the economic situation in the country. It doesn't make sense that we're keeping 6 trillion naira for subsidies that don't even benefit the poorest of society. And instead of using that money to develop the country or build infrastructure, pay salaries, increase salaries for civil servants, instead we're using that for a subsidy that, quite frankly, has outstayed its welcome.
But you would agree with me that removal of subsidy at this time is what many are talking about. The price of crude, in some cases, above $100. So whatever we are doing now, the price of PMS could be as high as, well, you are the expert, as high as 500 or 600 naira a liter. We know what is already happening in the country with regards to purchasing power, which we were just talking earlier with my first guest, talking about the aviation sector. Now, do you think that the phased removal will be a way to go?
Thanks for that question, Tolope. So, like you said, a sudden removal will be disastrous for the Nigerian economy. So we're already grappling with double-digit inflation. Inflation rates are at over 17%. And we know how much petrol is important to our society, to our economy. So for electricity, to transportation, you can't say that petrol is not important. But at the same time, like we said, we need to take it off. So a phase removal would be good, would be a good first step. But the problem with Nigeria is there's an idea and then there's implementation. So it's possible that, so we've seen steps where the government has tried to take off the subsidy before. Back a few years ago, petrol was like 87 naira, then it was increased to the current 165 naira, and that was supposed to be a phase removal, but then it just stopped and we stopped at 165. So it's one thing to have the idea and it's another thing to actually execute it. It's a good plan to have.
Great stuff. Let's talk about trust here. Noelle, trust is what I'm thinking. Do you think Nigerians will trust government if they are to implement the phase removal? And what are those things that you think should be done to help absorb this shock? Even if it's phased removal, what are those things, those quick wins, those things that government could just do that will make Nigerians, look the other way?
Yes, thanks for that. I think that trust is the biggest factor here. So even if the government were to remove the subsidy for Nigerians, and even for me as a Nigerian, the first thoughts that I'll be thinking is what they're going to do with the money that they're not paying, using for subsidies. So if you're not paying subsidies, the savings that you're making, what is it for? Are you going to use it to improve infrastructure? Are you going to use it to develop the country? Or is it just going to be to vanish into thin air? I think that's where trust comes in, and that's why the subsidy issue is such a big deal for people, and people are just don't know where. So for some people, it's just like the subsidy is the only benefit you get for being a Nigerian at this point, because we don't get benefits. In other countries, you get an unemployment benefits if you're not employed, you get social benefits and other things like that. In Nigeria, you can literally say that the subsidy is the only benefit you get. So for people, it's like, if the subsidy is taken away, then what's the benefit for me as a Nigerian? There's no guarantee for people from the government that the government is actually going to use this money to develop the country, looking at their track record. So I think that something that can be done there is that there needs to be accountability. And this is a governance and a larger Nigerian issue that affects every area of our society. Accountability is a big thing. So the government says they're going to do one thing, but then nobody sees the results. We're not sure. We can't trust their word. And it's just about building that trust back. But in the meantime, while the phase removal is happening, the biggest part of the country, the biggest part of the economy that petrol subsidies affect are transportation, right? So not just even transportation of people, also transportation of food, transportation of goods and even services across the country. So it's important that if there's like you said, something to hold people or to keep people, something to assure people that the government has their best interests at heart, then it needs to be investment in transportation. So there have been talks about electric vehicles, gas-powered vehicles, and other types of vehicles that don't rely on petrol, so that people won't feel the shock so much of that petrol subsidy being removed, because that's how it's going to affect the poorer people in society through transportation costs.
Brilliant stuff. Let's shift our discussion. I know this is not the first time we're talking about this, but they are burning issues. We must keep talking about them as we move on. Now, another argument from another end is that Nigeria should not implement an export-driven deregulation. Sorry, import-driven deregulation. We import our petroleum products. We don't refine in country. So we'll continue to get the blow. So if that is still the situation and we deregulate, what might happen at the end of the day?
Well, based on that scenario that you've just painted, if we deregulate, that is, petrol prices go back to market prices, which at this rate will probably be like over 500 naira per liter. Petrol prices will still be high because we'll still be importing. And it's not just about importing right now. So right now across the world, refining capacity is at an all-time low, because during COVID, some refineries shut down, and also due to climate change, refineries have just been, there hasn't been much investment in refining capacity across the world. So there's limited refining capacity, and there's huge demand for refined products like petrol, diesel, jet fuel. And that's why we're seeing this price crunch. So besides even the fact that crude oil prices are high, there's also that crunch from refining capacity happening. So yeah, like we're saying, if we deregulate and we're still importing, then Nigerians will still have to bear that burden of high prices of petrol. But the thing is that even if we were to deregulate, and let's say we had refineries in country on ground, right? What would happen would be that I don't think that the price difference would be that much, because first of all, if the refineries wanted to make money, then they would have to sell at the market price either way. So they wouldn't be selling at
All right, there. I think I have Noel back now.
sorry, I didn't know you lost me.
Yes, just for some seconds. We understand that. Okay, you were able to make your point there. Okay, let's wrap up on this note. Of course, we are not taking real advantage of what is happening in the crude oil markets now that we should be getting more money because of underproduction, all theft, and all that we face as a country. The NNPC next week should be totally free and become a limited liability company, I guess. What positives do you see bringing to the floor as we move on Nigeria's oil and gas industry?
So I don't think that a private limited NNPC will bring results immediately, because the issues that in the oil and gas sector, especially the oil sector, there are structural issues and there are deep issues. So vandalism and theft are not things that can be fixed by NNPC becoming a private company. This NNPC's privatization will just help with transparency and help with that divide between government and NNPC. So right now, sometimes, even for a lot of us, like, you don't see any difference between the NNPC and the government. You feel like, I'm sure even I sometimes, you say NNPC and government interchangeably in the same sentence, but it shouldn't be like that. The NNPC should be a regulated entity within the oil and gas sector. Just the same way Seplat and other oil companies are regulated, NNPC should also be regulated. So that's where this comes in. It will help with transparency and making sure that NNPC acts as a regulated entity within the oil and gas sector, rather than a regulator or acting as the government, or like we've seen cases where the government dips into NNPC to take money, NNPC fails to remit taxes or royalties because there's no difference between them and the government. So that's just where this comes in. I don't think that this will necessarily immediately change anything in the oil and gas sector.
So there will be partly a level playing ground for all of the companies to operate, just like NNPC would also operate. And you don't think that there could be anyone taking advantage? Remember what happened with the Seplat and ExxonMobil deal? Some were saying that that wasn't the way to go. Are we not sending wrong signals? Let's wrap up on that note to investors, particularly as we expect the PIA to bring in more investors, plenty money for the oil and gas sector.
Exactly. It's a bad signal to investors, because IOCs, international oil companies, Shell, ExxonMobil, they are leaving and there's nothing that can be done at this point about it. So the NNPC discouraging Seplat from buying up ExxonMobil's onshore oil company, MPNU, is a bad signal to investors. It just shows that they're not ready to do business. They're not ready to attract investment into the oil and gas sector in Nigeria. So yeah, that's the answer, is a bad signal.
Yes, it's good to hear you with that lovely smile. I appreciate your time. Noelle Okodli is a senior energy analyst at Sales Business. I do enjoy your weekend. I'll keep a tab on you. We're looking at what's playing out on the oil market. We'll discuss it sometime soon and at least understand it and see where Nigeria stands in all of this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.